Zaria Boone wasn't there for lunch. She didn't come to Breyer's Grill because she liked the food or the small-town charm. She came because every Tuesday and Sunday, between noon and 2, 3 key members of the Millwood Police Department sat at the corner booth, ordered steak sandwiches, and talked like the world was theirs. It had been 6 weeks since Zaria arrived in Millwood undercover, silent and invisible. The FBI didn't send agents like her unless things were already broken. And Millwood wasn't just broken. It was buried under decades of silence, protection, and the kind of power that never got questioned until now. She played her role perfectly. A middle-aged black woman, polite, quiet, always alone, always with her laptop open. People assumed she was a remote worker or some freelancer passing through. No one suspected she was recording conversations, noting license plates, mapping who sat where, who talked too loud, who looked nervous when certain names were mentioned. She never pushed. She waited. And Millwood gave her exactly what she needed: patterns. The men she was watching weren't careful. They didn't think they had to be. That's how the worst ones always are. When power becomes routine, people stop hiding their dirt. Zaria had already gathered hours of audio from the table behind hers, casual mentions of cleaning things up, jokes about street kids who disappear, one officer bragging about how he'd taught a loudmouth a lesson and got a pat on the back for it. One of them even laughed about deleting dashcam footage after a misunderstanding during a traffic stop. Zaria never flinched. She sipped her coffee, tapped her keys, and let them keep talking. Her apartment was temporary. Her car was rented under a shell identity, and her equipment was custom issued. She didn't leave fingerprints, literally or metaphorically. No neighbors knew her real name. No one at the diner knew who she was. And that was the point. Zaria wasn't there to be known, she was there to listen. But as the weeks passed, the temperature started to shift. The officers began glancing her way more often. The waitress stopped smiling. Once, the restaurant manager stepped out to make a phone call and came back visibly tense. Zaria noticed. That's what she was trained for. Observation wasn't passive. It was tactical. And in Millwood, watching could get you hurt, especially when what you were watching was the law itself. Still, Zaria didn't move fast. She had one chance to get this right. The FBI needed airtight evidence, not just that a few cops were crooked, but that the corruption was protected, institutional, woven into the town's operations like mold under the wallpaper. She had to prove it, document it, and stay just long enough to push it all over the edge without getting caught in the collapse. So she kept showing up. Same seat, same coffee, same calm face. She recorded one officer slipping cash into another's hand under the table. She noted when a local judge entered through the back door, shook hands with a uniform, and left without ordering anything. She cataloged who smiled at who and who didn't. She was a one-woman surveillance unit with no badge, no backup, and no room for mistakes. But the longer she stayed, the thinner the line became between careful and exposed. One wrong glance, one suspicious server, one moment of ego from a man who didn't like being watched. That's all it would take, and Zaria knew it was coming. It started with a look. Not a long stare, not even one meant to be noticed, just a half-second glance from Zaria toward the corner booth. That was enough. The officer sitting there, the one who always spoke just a little louder than the others, caught her eyes and didn't look away. For the first time, his smile dropped. He nudged the man next to him and leaned in like he was whispering a joke. But his tone had changed. Zaria had been careful for 6 weeks, but now, something shifted. The waitress came over with her coffee. But this time, she didn't ask if Zaria needed anything else. She just set the cup down hard and walked away without a word. 2 minutes later, the restaurant manager stepped out from behind the bar, pretending to clean something, glancing over at Zaria's table twice before pulling out his phone. Zaria knew exactly what was happening. Someone had decided they'd seen enough, and someone else had just made a call. 15 minutes later, the front door swung open, and 2 uniformed officers walked in like they owned the place. They didn't glance at the hostess, didn't wait to be seated. They moved with purpose, past the tables, past the conversations, straight toward Zaria's booth. She didn't flinch. She simply placed her spoon on the saucer and looked up. "Ma'am," one said, already reaching for his belt. "We need to see your ID. No explanation. No context, just authority," Zaria asked, calmly. Why the officer didn't answer. Instead, he asked what she was doing there, who she was meeting, whether the car parked outside was hers. It wasn't a conversation, it was an interrogation in public, meant to shame and intimidate. She kept her voice even. "I'm having coffee." "Is that a crime now?" The second officer stepped forward. "You're acting suspicious," he said. "We got a call." Zaria didn't move. Suspicious how she asked. No one had an answer. One of them glanced around the room, clearly hoping the audience would justify their presence. A few customers had pulled out phones. Others kept their heads down, pretending not to watch. Then it happened. Without warning, the first officer reached across the table and grabbed Zaria's purse. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to check this," he said. No warrant, no consent, just entitlement. Zaria locked eyes with him and didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. He unzipped the bag slowly, clearly expecting to find something, anything, that could make her look guilty. There was nothing. A phone, a notebook, lip balm, a folded receipt, and a wallet. He pulled it open, flipped through it, and then stopped. His face changed, not panic, not guilt, but something closer to realization. He knew he'd crossed a line, but it was already too late, by now. The room was quiet. Even the people who had tried to ignore it were watching. Someone was recording from the next table over, and that's when the front door opened again. A black SUV pulled up outside. A man in plain clothes stepped in without hesitation. He walked past the bar, past the stunned hostess, and straight to the officers still standing over Zaria's table. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He just pulled out a small leather badge and held it up eye level. "Officer Parker," he said, calmly, "you are relieved of duty, effective immediately. You've just violated multiple federal protocols by laying hands on a federal agent during an active operation." Zaria still hadn't stood up. She just looked forward, one hand on her coffee cup, the other resting quietly in her lap. The room went completely silent. Officer Parker froze, mouth slightly open, the purse still in his hand. The man with the badge turned to the room. "This individual is a United States federal agent, authorized to be here. You've all just witnessed an illegal search. And yes, this is being documented." That was the moment everything flipped. Not with sirens, not with arrests, but with stillness. The kind of silence that says you just made the worst mistake of your career, and everyone saw it happen. Zaria didn't stay to watch Officer Parker walk out. She didn't have to. The room had already said everything it needed to. Eyes lowered, forks dropped midair, conversations frozen. The people who once questioned her presence now questioned their silence. She quietly picked up her bag, the one they'd searched without cause, and stood without a word. She left behind an empty cup, a paid check, and a town that had just witnessed the first crack in its carefully protected shell. By nightfall, the footage from that afternoon had already been uploaded. A customer had filmed nearly the entire exchange from the officers approaching to the moment the FBI badge came out. The clip was under 5 minutes long, but it hit the internet like lightning. No names were mentioned, but hashtags didn't need them. The message was clear. A woman who said nothing had just cost a man his badge. What they didn't know, what the town didn't see, was that Zaria Boone had already finished her job. The data was complete. The audio logs, the surveillance notes, the timeline of meetings, the payment trails, the video clips recorded discreetly from her glasses. Everything had been sent to the bureau the night before. The incident at the restaurant was never part of the plan. It was just the final piece. The final proof that Millwood PD wasn't just careless, it was dangerous. The bureau didn't wait. Within 72 hours, subpoenas were issued. 3 officers were placed on administrative leave. One senior lieutenant, caught in Zaria's recordings discussing a falsified report, was indicted for obstruction. The restaurant manager resigned before formal charges were filed, and a local defense attorney, who'd once dismissed accusations of racial profiling as social media hysteria, now found himself under investigation for his ties to the same officers Zaria had tracked for weeks. Zaria never gave interviews. She declined public statements, even internally. She kept it brief. The data matched the pattern. Threat confirmed. Operation closed. But those who worked with her knew she hadn't just closed a file. She'd shattered a wall, and she'd done it without ever raising her voice. The FBI didn't release her identity to the press. They didn't need to. The story told itself. A woman entered a restaurant, faced down a system that thought she was invisible, and left behind a town forced to look in the mirror. And somewhere, far from Millwood, Zaria Boone was already moving on. Another town, another case, another place where silence had become a shield for the powerful. And once again, she would walk in quietly, sit down, and listen, because sometimes the loudest kind of justice starts with someone who says nothing at all. Zaria Boone didn't come to Millwood to make a point. She came to gather facts, but the town gave her something more, something she never intended to expose, but couldn't ignore. It gave her a mirror, one that reflected not just a broken system, but the people who held it up by pretending not to see. She never raised her voice. She never argued, never accused, never fought for space. She didn't have to. Because when you hold the truth, silence is louder than shouting. And when the truth is captured, documented, time-stamped, and undeniable, it speaks for itself. What happened in that restaurant wasn't just about one officer. It wasn't about coffee or glances or assumptions. It was about how quickly power can turn into abuse when no one's watching, and how easily fear disguises itself as protocol. But this time, someone was watching. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with purpose. Zaria didn't show up to teach anyone a lesson. She showed up to witness who they really were when they thought no one could see. And what she saw was enough. So what does justice look like? Sometimes it's not a courtroom. Sometimes it's not handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes it's a moment, a single mistake made by someone who thought they were above consequence and realized too late that they weren't. There are people in every town like Zaria. You may not notice them. You may overlook them. You may even underestimate them. But they're there, watching, listening, collecting the truth one piece at a time, not for revenge, not for fame, but because someone has to. And maybe that's the lesson, that justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes It enters quietly, orders a coffee, and waits until it's time.